Me? Don't see the chat box. Yes. Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm Marjorie Rosenberg from the IATEFL Membership Committee, the IATEFL Membership Committee. On behalf of IATEFL, I would like to welcome you all to this 13th webinar in our series with Lindsay Clandfield, who will talk about what's hot and what's not in course books. Lindsay is an award-winning writer, teacher, teacher trainer, and international speaker in the field of English language teaching. He's written more than 10 course books for language learners and is the co-author of various methodology books for teachers. He is also the co-founder of The Round, an independent self-publishing collective at www.the-round.com. You can find out more about him at his website, www.lindsayclandfield.com. This webinar would not be possible without our tech hosts, and I would like to thank Mercedes Viola and Heike Philp for their invaluable support today. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A pod on the screen rather than into the chat box. You will find this below the slides. At the end of the webinar, Lindsay will endeavor to answer as many questions as possible. We will make the slides from today's webinar available for 1 week on the IATEFL webinar. They will then be moved to the archives for members to view along with the recording, which will go into the archives after the webinar. As IATEFL website updates are done by IATEFL head office, both the slides and recording will not be available until sometime next week. I would also like to mention that IATEFL does not currently provide certificates for online webinars or conferences. And now over to Lindsay.
Unmic my microphone. Can we just check that everybody can hear me? Can you just type in yes if you can hear me? Yes, I'm getting lots of yeses. Great. Okay, so you can all hear me. That's good. If for any reason during the webinar you have problems hearing me, I imagine you can type that into the box. Mercedes is going to be keeping an eye on things. Mercedes Viola, she's one of the moderators here. She's going to be keeping an eye on that chat box and will be, hopefully able to give you a tip or whatever if for some reason something's happened. One of the most common things that happens if you suddenly don't get sound or the video freezes or whatever and everyone else seems to be okay is it's your internet connection, in which case I would recommend you log out and log back in again. Okay, so with that done, let's get started. My name is Lindsay Clandfield. Thank you very much to IATEFL for inviting me to do this webinar. Thank you very much to Marjorie for her introduction. As she said, I am a coursebook writer. I'm also a teacher and a teacher trainer. And this talk that I'm giving, actually, it's the first time I'm doing this as a webinar, is based on a talk I did a couple of years ago. And I've been having to update it very frequently because things are changing quite quickly. But yet some things are remaining quite similar. So I'm going to be talking about language teaching materials and specifically about course books. One quick thing here, if you do have a question, please put it into the Q&A and I'll try to get to these at the end of my talk in around 45 minutes from now. I'd like to have some time for questions and answers and I'll do the best I can. Okay? So what do I use as a starting point for this? Well, one of the things I've been reading about recently is a resurgence in interest in these things here, time capsules. That's just a quick survey to people. Can you type in the chat here if you've seen, if you know what a time capsule is? Have you done a time capsule at school? Incidentally, Heike has just said, nice picture. All of the pictures that are in this presentation are free. I've got the copyright from either a website called Morgfile, which is great for free photos, or the famous ELTPix, which I've been using as well for my presentations. You can see the links at the bottom of the page, the photos, and the attribution to the person who took the photo where possible. Right, so Christina, for example, has said, lots of people have said no, some people have said yes on what a time capsule is. as a Canadian, I'm from Canada, I imagine other North Americans might be familiar with this. I had to do one at school. A time capsule is where, as Christina wrote, you put things in a box, bury them, and come back to them several years later. And I had to do one at least 2 different schools that I was at. Some of you may have heard of these or have done them before. The funny thing is that now apparently people are digging up all of these time capsules around schools, or as school buildings are changing, they're finding these tons of things buried by school kids in school grounds. But it's quite fascinating. I think, I don't have sources on this, but I think time capsules were very popular in North America, in Canada certainly, during the 80s, when we were all worried about nuclear holocaust. So we were thinking, what were we going to bury? It's quite a frightening thing for kids to do. What are we going to bury as a memory of the time that we've been on this planet? So, why am I talking about time capsules on this thing? Well, I think a time capsule, in a way, is an interesting thing, a way of understanding the past. When you come back to a time capsule, usually in a time capsule, people may have put, at school, we would have put like letters, postcards, maybe some photographs of things, and writings about things that we thought were important at the time. We may have put small objects or things that we got out of cereal boxes or things like that. Julia in Portugal saying they are becoming popular again. They may very well be becoming popular again, and we may be seeing things like digital time capsules. Again, why am I talking about these now? Is I imagine what happens if we were to try to make a time capsule of what is happening in English language teaching at this moment. What would go in it? And like what physical things would go in it? I want you to think about that. What would we put in a time capsule physically to encapsulate the moment that we are living in English language teaching? Would you put an interactive whiteboard in it? Would we put what kinds of things might be? Photos of our classrooms? An iPhone, Christina said, a pen drive we might put with like some material and stuff on it. Hundreds of lists of verbs. Exactly. Or those kind of, that's AFL Learner put that. A course book, Carol said, who's nicely set me up for the next slide. I think that yes, we would be putting, amongst other stuff, if we needed to put physical things, we would probably be putting some course books in. The course book is, for better or for worse, still a very standard thing in the lives of many teachers. In fact, now, when I go to talks which talk about the past in terms of methodology, if we're talking about grammar translation or audiolingualism or things back in the 30s, 40s, in the 50s, when I go to talks that mention those things, often they put on the slides images from the course books of the time. They don't necessarily put sort of research papers. There's often images of the material that we were teaching with at the time. So often they're very funny. I saw some great presentations of about language teaching in the 50s and 60s using textbooks from former Soviet Union countries. So some fascinating material, insights into probably how teachers were working at the time. Although we can't be sure, because every teacher sort of interprets a course book in their own way. I think a course book would still be a valid way of looking at, if we were to put in a time capsule and then coming back 30 years from now, what we were doing, what many of us were doing in their class. So, I've been, as a course book writer, one of the things a course book writer has to do is look at all the other course books, especially because the competition for course books are in the market now is very fierce. I'm going to be speaking about course books that are international course books. That is that they are done by international publishers, sometimes called the Big Four. So Oxford, Cambridge, Longman, Macmillan, and also Cengage I'm bringing into this as well. I've been looking, someone asked what level. I looked, as a course book writer myself, I've had to look across all levels. So I've had all of these books I'm familiar with through all the levels that have been written. And all the publishers have copies of each other's books. They do reports on them. There are sort of spreadsheets of what people are doing and so on. This is perhaps not the very latest set of course books. There may be some others that have come out since then, but I'd say of the past 5 years, these are among the big ones in terms of the in terms of global reach. Now, there are local publishers. There are local branches of these publishers doing very popular books as well. I'm not looking at those so much. I'm looking more at the international ones. A couple that you may have noticed are missing as well. If you teach in a North American context, North American English, you may have noticed, why is Interchange not there, or Touchstone? I've looked at those, but I was thinking, because I was writing, for example, a British English course, I was looking more at the British English ones. Although some of the things I will be mentioning do also refer to the North American course books, okay? So these are probably now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The 12 big course books. Some of these are much bigger than others. Another noticeable absence from this list is Headway, which is still getting new editions put all the time. But I think that at the moment, New English File is coming up on a par with competition on Headway, and it's a better indicator of what's happening now, perhaps. Okay? Also, some of you have said we're using business ones. I'm talking about general English books. I'm not talking about exam books or secondary course books or business books. I'm talking about the general English books. Okay? These are the ones that are also often the biggest sellers. Right. Okay. Wanted to talk about different things of what's hot and what's not. Someone has put in the question, I'm going to address that again here. Someone's put in not looking at Headway. I did look at Headway. So Headway is also being examined on this and would probably come into this. But again, Headway is being so old, also having so much influence. The others have also kind of borrowed from Headway, but are considered the more new kids on the block kind of thing. So I wanted to divide into different areas that are hot and that are not. One is that is the methodology. Another is language, and then are other elements like the components and stuff. People will be, at the end, we'll probably end up having discussion, questions, free to disagree, and so on. These are some of the things that I've noticed. Okay, my smiley face indicates what is hot, and tends to be, especially in the British English, in terms of skills work, we're looking at things like integrated skills. When I started teaching almost 20 years ago, it was quite popular to have a reading class. Then at the university I was teaching at, we had a listening class. And I remember going to workshops when I started teaching where all the rage was, we must start teaching integrated skills. Well, I would say that many of the course books now do adopt that as a default position for skills work. By integrated skills, I mean that the book will contain a mixture. So there'll be, in a given lesson, there may be some reading, there may be also some listening, maybe a bit of speaking, increasingly maybe little bits of writing in the lesson itself. Also what I would say is hot is, I'm going to come back to questions in a bit, okay, Peter? I'll come back to them if you put them in the box, otherwise people will just keep going. I'll keep getting stopped. So put a question into the box. Also in terms of what is the hottest skill, I would say that in lots of the books that I've looked at, and also the conversations I've had in publisher rooms and stuff, is that the speaking tends to be the hottest skill at the moment. So what is considered hot would be like something that has lots of speaking, that gets the student speaking. Process writing, in terms methodologically of how, or an interpretation of process writing, let's say, a coursebook interpretation of process writing is still considered hot. So drafting, writing a draft, maybe working on the draft, and so on and so forth. A watered down version of process writing is hot. Lots of pair work and group work. If we were opening up the time capsule 30 years from now and looking carefully at the course books, we'd be saying, my gosh, there's loads of stuff where they're all being asked to work with a partner or work in groups. Whether or not that actually happens is a different question. But in the materials, it certainly looks like a given that you will be working with other students, talking in pairs, talking in groups. Another thing that has come on hot recently in terms of methodology is including other things in your syllabus. So sort of syllabuses with all kinds of things blended together. This is where you would get the famous content map, which has been around for a long time. I know Headway's one was one of the earliest ones that I remember seeing as a map Do you know what I mean by the contents map? Those 2 pages you see on in the front of a course book, which has grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. So it's got all the different strands. Yeah, that's sometimes called the multi-strand syllabus. And other strands are being constantly added to this content map as different course books try to sort of address different areas. So study skills is one. So the learning how to learn type things are being added in. Other things may be life skills. That's well, one publisher at least is going quite heavy on the life skills area. Critical thinking is another area which is being introduced into a multi-strand syllabus or attempted to be introduced. Yes? Sorry, someone was asking about the North American books. It was Interchange and Touchstone. It's been written in the comments there. So that's what I've seen as hot. What is not hot, though? What are things where, for example, if they're set across a table where people are brainstorming about a new book, usually an editor or the publisher will say, no, 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 we don't want that. Or the author will say, I am never going to do this, you know, because it feels old-fashioned or whatever. So things that are considered not hot now, it's not hot to say that we're adhering to only one kind of method. Now, one could argue that we are adhering to a sort of watered-down communicative approach, but you won't see coursebook authors or publishers sort of saying, this is following this one method. It also tends to be avoided to insist strictly on one way of doing the book. And this you'll notice if you talk to coursebook authors at conferences and stuff and you say, so what happens if I do it this way? Often you'll hear the coursebook author say, well, you could do it that way if you want, or we hope it is as flexible as possible. There's 1 or 2 exceptions to this rule, but most of the British English books, if not all of them, would be very careful not to say, you can only do this book in one way. You cannot skip anything. You cannot miss out anything. You cannot jump ahead. You cannot go back. So the name of the game, at least, purports to be, we're going to be as flexible as possible within the coursebook structure. Compare this to some books, let's say written 40 or 50 years ago, based on audiolingual principles, where it would have been said, or direct method principles, where it would have been said, you cannot do lesson 2 before lesson 1, and there's no way you can skip a lesson because you'll miss very important things in the building blocks of the course. We don't say that anymore. That would not be considered hot. Okay. Minimal stimulus is also not considered hot. By what I mean by minimal stimulus would be like just a picture and then having the whole lesson emerge from the picture. So I've seen one attempt at a course book over the past 15 years try to do this. It was never published, but it had like just a whole page where it was a picture and then some exercises, but not a lot. So there wasn't a lot of like stimulus, but a good teacher might be able to sort of say, hey, I know what I could do with this. No. There's lots and lots of stuff. You know, the stimulus, like we'll need the pictures, maybe more than one picture, now a video, a long text, lots of activities to try to, so this kind of minimal stimulus, or for some of you who know dogma type approaches to classrooms, which are minimal stimulus, minimal material, that's not considered hot in a course book. You want to have more stimulus than less. Another thing that's not considered hot, even though it does sometimes still happen, but you would never hear people bragging about it, would be decontextualized drills and sentence exercises. By this I mean a whole bunch of sentences which don't really connect to each other, which have like, you know, Mary and Paul as the characters, and there's no sort of rhyme or rhythm to it. It's just, that's usually stuff that gets frowned on in you know, when material is being prepared and so on. Sometimes it still does happen. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen. I'm just saying it's not hot. It's not, no one would want to show, your publisher's representative would not want to show you a page from a book where it says, look at these sentences. They're all about invented people. None of them connect to anything else. It's wonderful because you can just focus on the language. That wouldn't be considered hot to say. So a decontextualized drill is the same thing, like sort of saying, you know, just a whole bunch of sentences which are just the language practice. Even though there's arguments in favor of this, in some ways, of awareness raising, it isn't considered something hot that would be shown off about a book. If I had it in a book, for example, I would never give a whole talk saying, look how great and forward-looking this book is, because I've got these drills that don't connect to anything else. Okay, so those are not hot things. What about language systems? What's hot and what's not in language systems? By this I mean grammar and vocabulary, okay? Well, unfortunately, or one thing that is still very hot, even though it's not hot to say, but it's hot in terms of the book, is the linear grammar syllabus. This is, if you were looking at the books 30 years later, and even the books for the past 40, like for over a 40-year period, I would expect there has been very few big changes to that syllabus. And it's considered very not hot to break that syllabus at all. There have been some attempts where people said, maybe what happens if we put past simple before present simple? Because isn't it more common? That would be considered so not hot because the publishers would be scared that teachers are used to a certain way that the grammar syllabus is set, and any deviations from that tend to get punished. And this is actually true if there are any coursebook writers in the audience who have attempted and succeeded in breaking the syllabus a little bit. You may have found, I'm speaking from experience, you may have found people complaining bitterly that you've decided to do this before this, when, you know, it's always been that relative clauses come before reported speech or whatever. I mean, I've been in these kinds of meetings. Other things that are considered hot now, ever since should be lexical, excuse the typo, it's not lexial, it's lexical, but that kind of work on vocabulary. Since the publication of the lexical approach in the 1980s, I think it was, by Michael Lewis, has had a big influence on course books. Some would argue not enough. Fair enough, haven't gone as far. But in terms of much more work on vocabulary and vocabulary systems, so word partnerships, collocations, patterns, all of these things are becoming more and more frequent and would be considered hot, you know, quite hot to put in. And the kind of thing where people say, oh, I really like this. An editor might say, I really like this. Or a focus group that a publisher is trialing things would say, oh, they really like this part, you know, your lexical work. Also hot are extra vocabulary sections. So we have our regular vocabulary sections now in books, but that tends to be not enough. So there are things to be extra things. I'm trying to think, like sometimes it's called word spot, or extend your vocabulary, or word extra, or focus on the word. And those might be words like get, or certain patterns that don't fit into anything else. Yeah? Pronunciation. Suprasegmentals is hot. When I say suprasegmentals, I mean everything above the level of the individual sound. So more on individual sound by meaning like phonemes. So, you know, in the past, it was more hot to have lots of stuff on E versus I. You know, ship or sheep. Remember Ship or Sheep? Does anyone know that book, Ship or Sheep? Very popular book around 20 years ago. I still think it's great. So minimal pairs was very hot at the time. Less hot now, I think. More hot to have intonation, to have sentence stress. And one of the reasons for this, I think, is a recognition of global English and different accents and things like that. So that kind of stuff is becoming hotter. In terms of language systems, although this is a methodological thing, an inductive grammar approach, which I call pseudo-inductive. I don't think it's completely inductive. By an inductive approach, of course, you all know what I'm talking about, where the student has to figure out the rule and then apply it before, as opposed to being given the rule and then explaining it. So in the past, there may have been more, here's the rule, do the exercises. Now it's more hot to say, here are a couple of sentences. Can you figure out what the missing part is, or answer the questions? Although I call this pseudo-inductive because it isn't really inductive in the way that the people who were writing about an inductive grammar approach would have suggested teaching that. It's sort of very handheld. There's still a gap to be filled with only one right answer. So it's getting there. I mean, the idea behind inductive is that hopefully by figuring it out, you remember it better. And we're getting towards that, but it's still, I think, kind of not completely there. Exercises on text as well are hot. We still have lots of sentence-based stuff, but anything where you could put it in a little text, like a paragraph with the gaps or changing things, are also considered hot. And again, we can never get enough. It's hot to have extra grammar, extra vocabulary. If anyone can say who was the first book to put the extra grammar exercises at the back of the book, I don't know. I think it was English File, but that's my bias from looking at too many British English books. I don't know who. Does anyone remember the first book that they saw that had the grammar extra at the back of the book? So you'd be doing your grammar exercise, and then it says, for more, turn to page so and so. Because in the past it used to be all like right in the book itself, so you would do all the exercises there. I'm not sure. I think it was English File, but I'm not sure. But everyone is doing it now. So everyone's got, or almost everyone's got, an extra grammar at the back of the book. And then to kind of distinguish yourself from the competition, books started saying, well, we now have extra vocabulary at the back of the book, extra other things at the back of the book, grammar rules and explanations. So what else is considered hot? I would say is purporting at least to be corpus-based. Many of the big publishers, Cambridge, Oxford, Macmillan, I think all of the big ones, they have access to corpus. They encourage their authors to use corpus data in terms of making their sentences and so on. How strictly this is observed is a matter of some debate. So I don't think it's completely there, but at least it pretends to be or tries to be. And it will be put in the publication material, sort of like following the real English from X corpus. So that would be considered hot. How am I doing so far? Am I going too quick, or am I going too slow, or are you okay? You can just type okay. Fine, fine, fine. Okay, fine. All right. What's not hot in language systems? Okay, what's not hot? Things like culturally specific lexical sets. By culturally specific lexical sets, I mean the stuff that was maybe appearing 25 years ago in books that were very culturally specific sets to Britain. I think, for example, of upper intermediate house vocabulary. You all know when I talk about house vocabulary, upper intermediate house vocabulary in one book that I used to use had me teaching things like thatched and terraced houses and thatched roof and things like that, very culturally specific to England. Now, I was teaching at the time in Spain, in Barcelona, where everyone lived in apartments anyway. So it was kind of, I always felt it was kind of unfair to be testing them on thatched roof, where they would very rarely see it. So things like that tend to be less common now. Obscure lexical sets. So this would be the stuff at advanced level where you'd put a really obscure set of lexis just to kind of make it hard. What tends to happen at advanced level now is we'll do more word partnerships, collocations, connotations, things like that. Less sort of like loads of just really difficult words. Grammar without context is not considered hot, so it needs to be contextualized usually, or an attempt to contextualize it in a sentence or a text. And the concept of input flooding. Input flooding is things like, what's an example of input flooding? It's like you repeat the same structure over and over and over again. So you make a text where it says, like, John is eating in the park. He is listening to his Walkman. He is not listening to the phone. He is not talking to. So you have like loads of these things repeated over and over, which there's argument on whether or not that's more effective or not. It's not considered, I think, hot right now because it's considered inauthentic. Although I personally like it as a method, having lots of different things, if it's well written. I think the problem is when it's not well written, and I think if you go back to some books in the 1970s, they had very well written, excellent examples of input flooding. But poorly written examples of input flooding sound horribly inauthentic and boring. So that's a couple of questions I had for you about the grammar syllabus and small changes. I said it wasn't changing that much, but there are little changes happening, little tiny changes, and these I'm going to base in terms of questions. So you can sort of, lots of people are participating, which is great. But let me just go through a couple of these. First of all, have got. Someone mentioned this before. I saw it fly past me on the chat stream. Have got. Is it worth the bother? Is it worth the bother to teach have got at elementary? Especially in the past, course books used to put it as lesson 2. Remember, lesson 1 was always what? To be, right? I am, you are, negative, question. And then lesson 2, you went from to be to have got. So from I am a student to I have got a pen. This was in at least 3 books that I worked with in Mexico. And then you went to present simple. And then what happened? First of all, you had a nightmare when you started teaching the negative of present simple with verbs like have, not in terms of possession. And as a North American, I found it like super annoying when I was thinking, well, I can just say I have a brother. Can't I say I have a brother? And I think that has now changed. I think if you look at the latest books, all that list of books that I gave you, have got is not very early in the syllabus. It's later now. So we do to be, and then we do present simple. It's still in there, but it's later, and it's often tagged as, maybe more common in British English than in North American English for possession. Here's another thing. Conditionals. Here was some very interesting stuff that happened around 5 years ago, I remember. Lots of coursebook authors, 10 years ago, lots of talks about how the conditionals, that first, second, third, zero mixed, it's not the greatest way of describing them. And in fact, as we started finding out more about corpus stuff, we started finding out that conditionals were getting mixed all the time. And was it worthwhile talking about conditionals in this way, labeling them this way? And there were attempts to get away from that. But what I found when I did it on an early book around 10 years ago is when we went to markets and talked to teachers, they were like, where's first conditional? Where's second conditional? The publisher got scared because they heard it over and over again. The teachers demanding, what do you mean we're not going to teach first and second conditional? I love teaching first and second conditional. Actually, as a teacher, I love teaching first and second conditional as well. You know why? Because it was like finally I was teaching English like math. Like there was an equation that everyone loved to copy down. Didn't you find that your students love copying down the third conditional equation? They all went nuts for it. They were like, this is finally like a rule, a formula, exactly, Julia, a formula and a structure that it was easy. It wasn't messy like your dummy auxiliaries and the don't and stuff like that. But now you will find more and more the current generation of course books will put, like this is sometimes called first conditional, but they'll maybe more focusing on the would aspect, the hypothetical aspect, or the future implied in the present in the second part of the clause. Okay? Another thing, uses of can. What comes first in uses of can? You're teaching can to elementary learners, teachers. What are you going to teach first? What kind of can are you teaching first? Ability, exactly. Hada, ability. Tian, hada, ability. Ability, of course, exactly. Ability is usually taught for can first. But you know what? According to corpus stuff, and I was reading this from the work of Mike McCarthy, what is the most frequent use of can? Is it ability in the sense of I can swim, I can speak English, and I can type? No. It's permission. Penny's right. It's permission is the most common. So here we get a dilemma with the grammar syllabus. The most common is permission. Can I go to the toilet? You can't smoke here. Can I do this homework later? Can I hand it in tomorrow? Loads of examples I can think of, right? But it's easier, which is easier to teach. It tends to be easier to teach first can for ability. Like I can swim, and it works with pictures and so on and so forth. Plus, I did put in a book can for permission first, and then I put can for ability afterwards. Well, guess what, everybody? When I went out to your countries and met teachers and stuff, guess what I was told first thing by angry elementary teachers? They told me, why did you put can for permission first? We always teach can for ability first. And so here you get to the problem where you're moving against years and years of traditional. And so I don't know. The next one, I mean, that obviously affects me as a course book writer, and it affects the editor who overheard that. You hear that enough times, and then they say, listen, if they want transferability first, and they're going to buy the competitor's book because they put transferability first, well, guess what, Lindsay? You're putting transferability first, and I don't care what the frequency count is. Yeah. So that's another thing. Past simple, another area is that changes from book to book is how to break that up. Do you do irregular first, regular next? Do you do negative first? These are little things which agonize coursebook writers and publishers. Like, what do you do with past simple? Time expressions are also something that's coming into grammar syllabus more now. So I found in all the books, almost all the books I was looking at, and I remember Dave Willis, who's also an influential writer on lexical approach, wrote about teaching tenses along with the expressions that they co-occur with. So when you're teaching present continuous, you teach things like at the moment, momentarily, now, and so on. When you're teaching present perfect, you teach time expressions that go with that. Of course, I remember certain books doing this ages ago, a long time ago. There was one series, I think, called Grammar Dimensions that was really popular in Canada that was doing this kind of stuff as well. I don't know if that's not Diane Freeman's book, but I'm not sure. Anyway, great grammar book, Grammar Dimensions, I think it was called, one of my first books as a teacher. And again, keywords and patterns are being taught now in terms of grammar, and this is where we're getting the grammar syllabus is mixing with the vocabulary syllabus. So present simple, now you often get things like read a newspaper, read a magazine, read a website, read my favorite websites. So you kind of put all of these into the thing together. Gosh, I've been dallying too long. I'm going to have to start going quickly, okay? Language skills, because I want to get to some questions. Language skills, what's hot? I've said some of these before. Things like speaking in every lesson, integrating the skills. Developing skills is still hot. So the idea of doing like micro skills in terms of reading, like helping people become better readers and stuff like that, or listeners. Although there's a lot of pushback on this. There's lots of people researching and arguing that some of these skills can be transferred from your first language over into the second language. That being said, tradition is now dictating, 20 years, let's say, if tradition is dictating, well, we're going to still keep teaching skills because that's how we've made our courses. So developing skills could be changing. Writing for fluency is a new thing which I think is becoming hot because we're writing on our devices so much. So we're seeing more little writing activities, which are like speaking activities. So what is the new black, though? What are the hottest things? And that's what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on and get to the next 10 minutes is on these. I think the new black, for a while, around a few years ago, certainly when I was working on a course book called Global, but lots of colleagues as well, lots of my colleagues working on other course books, English as an international language, EIL, as a lingua franca, as also ELF. So this means we're seeing more and more international accents coming into the audio. You're hearing more and more authentic audio. So sort of not the very simplified audio. It's getting more authentic audio and video of people who aren't English or American speaking English. Yeah. This also means we're exploring more spoken grammar. Elements of grammar that weren't traditionally in the grammar syllabus are getting touched on a little bit. And the idea of a corpus stamp of approval, sort of like the publisher will put on the front of the book, this is real English. You know why? Because we proved it, because we have the corpus to back it up. So that kind of stuff is considered the new black. It's not the newest of the new black, because I think you all know what I'm going to come to soon as the other new black. But another thing before I get to that is other skills. Michael Swan recently has been wrote an article where he kind of questioned this. He's like, you know, guys, aren't we language teachers? We should be just teaching language, surely. Well, the new hot in course books would say, no, we're not just language teachers. We're doing lots of other things. So some publishers are angling on life skills. And this is very common in some countries' ministry guidelines, you know, that language is a life skill and we should be teaching other life skills, like how to work together well, how to communicate better and stuff. Competences, different kinds of competences. These are based on often what's happening at the ministry level in countries. And another biggie is critical thinking skills, which is being wide open to many different interpretations. So in a way, that works really well with a course book because you can sort of distinguish yourself from your competition by just interpreting the term slightly differently. Okay, I interpreted it in one way, another book interprets it in another way. Then we can have fights galore on which has the best interpretation of critical thinking skills. But it's there. So other skills, I think one of the things, if we were looking at a time capsule 30 years from now, that people would say, is this just teaching English? It looks like they're doing a whole bunch of other stuff here, or at least trying to. Okay. But finally, the CEF, Common European Framework, is it still hot? Yes, I think it is. We all now have the level system on all the books, A1, A2, B1, B2, regardless if it's in Europe or if it's outside of Europe, they're all there. Can-do statements and self-evaluation, those just have to be there now. Outcomes-based learning, this kind of stuff, I don't know if that's so much CEFR, but it's certainly using the framework to sort of try to get to an outcomes-based kind of teaching. Learner autonomy, which is talked about a lot in the framework, that's very hot now. Portfolios, diaries, and dossiers, maybe not, but certainly the level system, can-do statements, and self-evaluation. I would say, I'd venture to even to say that you cannot write and publish a course book now unless you have some of those things, if not all of them. You won't get a word in, you won't get it through the door. Okay. Finally, the new black is digital, digital, digital. And this is where it's going to be changing a lot, folks. But let's just go on what's hot right now. Most courses now have to have a video component. Okay. Most courses would have a support website. So it's not just a book, you need to have a website. Courses now have things like a digital version of their workbook or their student's book. These could be called an e-workbook, an active book, an acti book, whatever keyword that sounds kind of digital and nice, an iBook, an e-book, whatever is the coolest thing that, let's say, Apple or Samsung is doing, we're going to probably try to put into the course book lexicon. CD-ROMs are on the way out. So CD-ROMs, more and more people are trying to get these onto tablets now, so I expect that will be gone within 3 or 4 years. DVD-ROMs, still around, but I expect, again, will be gone and will be delivered through online medium. More and more courses have exam generators, so you can allowing the teachers to make their own exams through sort of like software that'll help you make the exams based on the material. Learning platforms, this will be the future, I think. Publishers will have their own learning platform, learning management systems that your course will be part of. A teacher resource CD, still hot, but will probably be replaced by website. Someone has asked about apps. Diana asked about apps. Curiously, no. They cost too much to develop, according to 3 publishers I've talked to, and the return is too low. They can't sell them big enough. So apps, yes, but they're often part of the marketing budget. So they'll be like a little thing. I mean, this might be changing. Don't take my word on this, but certainly the feeling I got was that apps were nice to have, but didn't get enough return on investment. IWB software, definitely hot, and ebooks. So having, as I said, ebook versions of things. Hot coursebook topics. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about these. These are things, as the coursebook, these are all international coursebooks. So what tends to happen is there tends to be an echo of the certain kinds of topics that are very hot right now. Things like around the world, anything that's around the world. So weddings around the world, birthdays around the world, shopping around the world. Whatever tradition around the world is like hot, a kind of, popular put in. Other things are anxieties of modern life and health memes. These often are food, sleep, water. So like, are you drinking enough water? What's the right amount of sleep? What's the latest superfood? Does GM crops worry you? All of these kind of modern life anxieties around health are big. Urban life is big as well, traffic, nightlife, etc. Celebrity lifestyle is very big. So although it's kind of going, there's yes and no on this case, but I still think there's a lot of celebrities still in and success stories. lifestyle and cosmopolitan style questionnaires. So sort of like, are you a good liar? Or like, are you a truthful person? That kind of a light stuff that personally I don't really like, but it's very popular still in course books. Collections. For some weird reason, stories about people who have strange collections, like the man who collects toy elephants, or I don't know, but that tends to be at least in one, it's been in several books. People who live a long time. Anyone, does that ring a bell? The people from Japan on an island who lived for a long time, the people, the oldest man in the world in Brazil or whatever. There's tons of stuff like that. Busting stereotypes about the English, like, do the English really drink tea? Or do they drink more coffee? Do they really read newspapers? Do they wear bowler hats? That kind of stuff. Very, yes, Okinawa, exactly. That's Okinawa is like all English teachers know that island from their course books. Robots, some reason, robots is always a cool one to get your cans in. Look, this robot can now do this, and so on. Mobile phones, totally. And internet, social networking, and so on. So lots of those are the hot topics. What's not hot? Well, there was a whole workshop on this a little while ago, so I won't go into detail, but the PARSNIPs acronym are the things that are not allowed usually in course books and will remain not hot, okay? Politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, and pork. These are considered not hot. Not just not hot, they are not allowed. If you are aiming on doing a course book for an international market, you will at some point or another come up against this as a guideline. Okay, so and these are for various reasons. Lots of teachers get angry about this, myself included sometimes. But I can see the other side as well. I've had some lessons which I've tried to do personally as a teacher based on politics that just have gone disastrously wrong. Other times it's for religious reasons, and so it's not, some of these things could be considered offensive. Other times it's just hard to see how you would make a course book unit on sex. I just don't know as a writer how I would do it. But nevertheless, this is what also, not even a hint of some of these things is what makes people criticize course books a lot, because they tend to stay on the bland, safe side. Yeah? Okay. No, I totally agree with people who are saying it is a controversial topic, but it can be handled. Well, I have written another book on that, which I self-published, but I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so let me go on to the next one. So those are the things. Now, the last thing, last 5 minutes before we get to some questions, is the latest hot stuff. I want to name 3 things that I think you will be seeing a lot of, which are going to be very hot in the future, in the near-time future. These are slides from Newton Education, which is an education startup. They're very big on analytics in education and so on, and they're working with many of our publishers. If I could just point to this line here, which you may not be able to read, which says, education is a $7 trillion industry. This shows the digital rise in education in various graphs. What's happened is the tech companies have become very, very interested in education. Ed tech is getting a lot of investment, record amounts of investment. And a lot of that is also beginning to come into English language teaching, publishers and so on and so forth. So some 3 words that I would say to look out for as the new hot things that publishers are currently wrestling with. They're not quite sure yet what they're going to do, but these kinds of things are the big things that will be coming. One is gamification. I can't explain all of these in detail, but I'll give you a tiny vision. Gamification would be things like using point systems, badges, leaderboards, and stuff within a digital environment of a course to sort of add motivation. So you complete a series of grammar exercises and you get points for it. So those of you who are really digital savvy on this, I'm really sorry. I'm going really quickly. And I know we could argue forever about what gamification is. To everyone else, look it up. But gamification is sort of like making more game elements into a course. Second thing, a learning management system. Moodle being the most famous open source one, the publishers and various other players are all trying to build their own learning management systems now. Or many of them are. okay? So that they can deliver directly to that, and you can have online courses. Once they have a learning management system, the next step would be to have adaptive learning, which means you would have the material that could adapt as the student works their way through it. So that the text of the student's having problems in a certain area and can respond and give you more practice in another area. Again, I'm being very big simplification here. And a lot of this, the three things, the gamification, learning management system, and adaptive learning, all lead toward another thing, which is big data. If you have a course which has thousands of people using it within a learning management system, and it's gamified, and the system is adapted, it will generate a lot of data about how the students are learning. And according to the people in favor of all this big data, that will help the school and the teachers to customize the learning better. It's still very much debated. And I don't want to get into those debates now because we don't have time. But these four words are the things that I would expect are very high on the agenda of almost any publishing house right now, or at least 2 out of the 4 of them are definitely in there. Anyone else? I think most people who have contact with publishers would agree, and most people who know about these things have probably started hearing more and more about them. And you'll be seeing more of these at our conferences. So, 6 trends to watch, though. This comes from an excellent blog by Philip Kerr. He's given me permission to share this. He wrote a blog on adaptive learning in ELT. If someone can put that into the chat thing there, the address, or someone can find it, I'd appreciate that. I don't have it here. But he says 6 trends to watch in terms of the future of courses. So I talked about what's hot and what's not now. He talked about what's coming. I think I agree with many of these. One, we may see a move away from traditional course books towards content on learning platforms. So a slow move away from like the traditional book. Slowly, but that's where it's looking at going now. The rise of adaptive learning technology is a new trend poised to take off. So whether or not it will work, yet to be seen. Whether or not it will be tried, it's going to be tried. They're going to be trying to put this into platforms, adaptive learning. The adaptive elements of these courses will focus primarily or exclusively on discrete item grammar, vocabulary, functional language, and phonology. Because the computer, that's what it's best at doing. It will be analyzing all these little things as students work through exercises. It's harder, for example, if not impossible, for it to do it on speaking or writing essays and stuff. Thank you, Daphne. Centers will be able to upload their own content to the platform, and the content there will be customizable. So customizable is another buzzword you'll be hearing, that you can buy a course, but you can customize it. Okay? Assessment will be a major part of this new course format. This is likely to be discrete item assessment rather than skills work. I totally agree. From everything that I'm seeing now as a writer, a lot of stuff which will be based very firmly tying into assessment. So if you thought we were getting away from test and assessment, sorry guys, it's going to still be there. Again, I'm not talking, personally, I think some of these trends are very alarming, but I think they are existing, okay? The level descriptors of the Common European Framework will be made more and more explicit, as this is what the software requires to function properly. So the software and the course stuff need to know more, like what is an A1 level piece of grammar? What is an A1 level word? What is a B2 level word? What is not a B, which of these structures is outside the reach of a B1 level learner? The Common European Framework currently doesn't do that. And I think sensibly so, because it's very hard to do it. Diana, I think this, from what I'm seeing as a writer of adult post-school classes, there's still assessment is built in there because they expect the books to go into both areas, universities and to adult things. So they want to sell it to most places. There are several projects that are working on this already. For example, English Profile is working on word lists of things according to the CEF levels. There's another project working on structures according to the CEF levels. I think this could eventually be something that gets criticized very heavily. Still, it's early days, so I don't want to venture and say anything about it yet. But one of the reasons to do all of this, is to make it easier for the software to work and adapt and help respond. Okay? And that comes from Philip Kerr's Adaptive Learning blog, which is actually going to be coming out as a free ebook with the round in a week or so. So there's going to be a free ebook all on this whole adaptive learning trend. So, come to the last 7 minutes of the talk. And there were some questions. So, Mercedes, is it okay if I go to the questions now? Dennis writes, how can I read the questions here? How can I make the questions bigger? I don't know, Mercedes. Yes, thank you. Okay. Dennis from Germany asks, how do I defend the writing of textbooks to my dogma friends? Yes, I have friends who are vehemently anti-textbook. Well, we just have to agree to disagree and get along like that. That's all I can say about that. As Scott Thornbury, one of the founders of Dogma, says, some of my best friends are coursebook writers. And some of my best friends are Dogma people. And we agree to disagree on some things. EFL Learner asks, would integrated skills imply a communicative approach? In theory, yes. Again, I'm talking about what is in the books, not what people are doing in class, by the way, everybody. So I'm not making judgments, because I think lots of times what happens in class is different than what's supposed to happen or what the course books envisage will happen. I'm looking at judging on what the books say, imagining that the classes are being done in that way. In which case, then integrated skills would imply a communicative approach. Mercedes asks, is it still necessary to have British and American books? Aha! Wouldn't it be better to have global English books? Aha! Thank you, Mercedes. I tried to do that with global. That was the original idea. You know what? Some schools, some very big schools, have made their whole reputation over 50 years on being British English school using British English book. Or other schools that have made their reputation over 50, 75, 100 years being, we teach American English using American English books. Those schools will not change. So, or at least they haven't changed yet. So there is, in some countries, some markets, that very strong distinction. So you get, they only want the British English books. For better or for worse, that's what's happened. Maimuna asks, hi Lindsay, the organizational pattern of a book adheres to the philosophy behind writing and its objectives. What kind of course books can be followed without following its given sequence? Well, I would argue lots of those books that I showed you on the first slide, you probably can move around within that sequence, especially beyond elementary level. I would argue that for lots of those you could. Once you're beyond elementary or pre-intermediate, I think you could probably skip a unit or do a later unit a bit earlier and so on. There is some, of course, there is some recycling. You might lose some of that recycling, but it isn't, I don't think it is as strict. Lots of the strictness of that grammar syllabus is based, at higher levels, incidentally, I believe is based on tradition, just because every other book has done it that way and everyone's used to it being done that way. So you break from that tradition, and the people criticizing you most are the teachers who are using the books, who are used to it in a certain way. Susan asks, would you say parsnip is becoming diluted? I don't understand, Susan. Do you mean that, like, is it more stuff getting in there? Not sure. I'll come back to that in a minute. I've been told at least twice to adhere to parsnips. Okay. Mercedes, why are we still using a linear grammar syllabus? Okay, Mercedes, write a book without a linear grammar syllabus. Go out to several schools, try to sell it. When all the teachers say, we don't want this, we want a linear grammar syllabus, I don't know. That's a cynical answer, but it is something that I find is true. I mean, I'd love to see one. I'd love to write one, but I think you may find that actually with these content platforms, people may be able to actually get away from that a little bit. But then again, maybe not, because the software is going to be written that you have to build one thing after another, right? The adaptive software will make it even more linear. In fact, you could argue that the adaptive software, if not done rightly, will make us even more locked into that syllabus. Okay. Nick asks, to what extent do you think teacher training qualifications influence teacher expectations of what good material consists of? Is there a washback effect from teacher training courses which shapes coursebook content? Yes, I think there probably is, Nick. I think you're right. And is this negative or positive? I think it's positive in some ways. I think the washback from teacher training courses pushed, for example, more speaking to be included in course books. I think the washback from teacher training pushed more communicative activities. Unfortunately, some things haven't moved that much. Grammar syllabus has not moved that much, for example, or indeed course books and adding more and more stuff. So I think it can be positive. So maybe that's where more action should take place. What about idioms, Marjorie asks? Are they being specifically included? I think the idioms that would be considered transparent or international English idioms, and that's kind of down to some corpus stuff perhaps, but I think it's also I think in that case, it's down to like your instinct. So lots of phrasal verbs that are considered international or internationally used, yes, but idioms like the famous raining cats and dogs, no. Or look a gift horse in the mouth, no. I would expect they're not in the international ones, unless you're at advanced. Diego from Portugal, hi. Are digital games hot or not? If not, should they be? I think they are hot. I don't know. The problem is that the good digital games tend not to be done by educational publishers. You may find one or two exceptions, so apologies if you're a publisher in here and have done a really cool one. But majority are, if you compare it to regular digital games, they're not as good. So, and they cost, and the thing is that regular digital games now have so much investment that I question whether educational publishers should spend most of their investment making a really good game as opposed to making good pedagogical stuff. Obviously, the dream thing is to have both. But then you're talking, like, there's only so much money, so where are you going to spend that money, right? Susan Hilliard, do you think they may ever include drama? Some of them do, but I don't think they do as much as in the past. There were in the books in the 70s and stuff. I think of those of you taught English in the 70s probably had books which had more potential for drama stuff and interesting drama stuff. Sorry, we're past 5 o'clock. What do? Do I stop here? Do we stop the recording? And I can keep going for another 15, 20 minutes, but I don't want to go over time. I defer to the IATEFL people in the room. Participants seem fine? Carry on? Okay, we'll keep going. Marjorie, is that okay?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
It seems everybody's very happy, so we'll keep going a bit if it's okay with you.
Fine with me.
Yes, we're getting in the chat box. We asked the question in the chat box. I'll just stay on camera. I think it's easiest.
If it's fine for everyone else, then that's fine with me.
Okay. I'll mute my mic until it's time. Like another 5-10 minutes, maybe?
Sure.
Okay, at about just before 1:15, I'll come on so that we can finish up.
Okay. Chris in Sophia asks, what about corpus-based exercise books? I'm talking about the courses as a whole here, so I kind of mean the workbook and the student's book. Although one thing is that the student's book is always the pride of place in terms of the research, the work, and everything gone, and the other stuff is written afterwards. So corpus-based exercise books, sure, why not? I would expect that some of the later grammar books, recent grammar books from the publishers, are more corpus-based. I would be pretty sure that the latest CUP and OUP stuff are using corpus stuff. I'm pretty sure they are. What about CLIL? Susan asks. CLIL is hot, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mention that. That is a kind of hot thing. And the way it's hot in our language course books is having more real-world stuff. So having like some geography stuff, sciencey stuff, and things like that. And I think we're finding more of that and international type stuff. But it's very watered down. It's a bit like CLIL in course books is a bit like inductive approach in course book grammar exercises. It's there, but it's not the full thing. Why don't I ever mention Pearson books? They're amazing. Great. Sorry, I did mention Pearson books. There were two in there. Cutting Edge, which is like was a huge, very popular and influential Pearson book for years. I had to study it in great depth to analyze what was happening with Cutting Edge. And also the latest one, which is also very popular, which is Speak Out. So I did mention those. Both of them include, Speak Out was notable for including video, BBC video. So interesting departure there, because Speak Out went back and did some quite British video stuff. So that was a very interesting move that they did with Speak Out. So the BBC, very British kind of things, whereas the rest of us had been moving away from that. Cutting Edge is also very notable. For those of you who used the first edition, you remember it was called a task-based approach. Do you know that? Do you remember that? Who remembers it being called Cutting Edge, a task-based approach? Yes. And then if you notice, the second edition was not called a task-based approach. Again, I think this, I don't know the story exactly behind it, but I think it comes from, you know, teachers wanting only a little bit at a time. You don't want to go too far, so it becomes a bit more conservative in its approach as it becomes more popular. What will future classrooms be like? Oh, someone asked that from Turkey. Too big a question for me to answer in this book on course books, I'm afraid. I direct you to the Learning Technology SIG. They're great, and they do loads of stuff on this kind of thing. Some of them are in here. I think Sylvia is in here. She would know a lot about that. Vicky would have a lot to say about that. There's lots of really great people in here who will know. Okay. Yes. Mercedes asks, this is a really good question. A question regarding course books. Can we say that we end up doing what is hot for publishers? What publishers know they can sell? Grammar, syllabus, not apps, etc.? Yes. I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, people say, oh yeah, because the publishers are planning this or whatever, but the publishers are doing what they can sell. And they do that by asking like hundreds, thousands of teachers what they like and what they don't like. And so it's rarely the case that something would stick around that everyone hates. Now, lots of people hate books. Okay, so don't get me wrong, they do hate course books. But lots more people like them and need them. Okay, now that's a controversial statement. Okay. But if everyone really did hate course books, they would do something different to make money. If everyone hated grammar as much as some people say online and stuff and say at conferences, there wouldn't be grammar in the books. Like if consistently everybody said, we hate the syllabus, we don't want to teach this way, we want to teach another way. Everybody. I'm not talking about the people in this room. I want you to think about all of your colleagues, all of them, the ones who never go to conferences, the ones who don't go, who aren't members of any association, who aren't interested in any of this, but who are teaching. They probably are comfortable using a course book and doing the stuff. They may be wrong, and things do change. They do change little by little. But I think that Mercedes is right, is that publishers will try to sell what they think they can sell. Daphne asks, language proficiency certificates, what's your take? I don't really have one. I find it as a writer, I find it, if we're looking at the whole area of assessment, I find it as a writer sometimes painful to have to go through all of that stuff. But I don't know, maybe not part of this talk to talk about assessment and international and proficiency certificates. Jian Mei in the UK asks, what are the generic criteria for choosing a course book for a new program, say intermediate? I think it depends on the program. I can't really go into that here. That depends on different programs. Ministry guidelines. If you're a private language school, it may depend on what the head teacher likes in terms of what the publisher show them. There's lots of factors. I'm not sure I could go into it here. Bill. Hi, Bill. Bill is from the Global Issues SIG, a great colleague of mine, shares fantastic stuff. Can you imagine textbook production not controlled by private profit-oriented corporations? Oh, great, this question. I knew this would be something like this coming from Bill. Yes, I can. I can imagine this. I don't imagine how successful it would be. I started The Round, which is a collective where authors are making their own books. So obviously I can imagine to an extent that, but not textbooks. Textbook production is so expensive that individually I wouldn't be able to do it. But we have been doing stuff collectively and independently of any publisher over at The Round. So, but I could imagine it could be controlled. It's good. Textbook production also can be controlled by the state, for better or for worse. But there are lots of examples of state-controlled textbook production that also people, had the same criticisms of or whatever. So I could imagine it being not profit-oriented. Irina, a course book with a working e-platform. Irina, does this mean that you've tried bitterly several e-platforms that don't work? Because I can imagine that probably is maybe part of your question. I'm not going to mention any, I'm not going to plug for any single course book here. I think that lots of those course books, platforms are being built or being rebuilt as we speak. So maybe it's too early to say. I would say that the early platforms are sort of, you know, they're not quite there yet. But I would say by 2016, you may see some things which are interesting. Not sure. Is there any old course book that I still like and use? No, I mean, no. I don't have a single favorite. I've used things like Streamline before. I've used the original Headway. I think the other thing is that Headway has a lot to answer for. A lot of the course books I showed you at the beginning of this talk. It is the most popular English language textbook sold in the world, and all the publishers know that or have known that for years. And so lots of the things do obviously take a page from Headway. There's lots of Headway influence on those things, for better or for worse. But that's a problem with what Bill is saying. When you have a textbook production as profit driven, you do get, it's hard to break out of that. What is the trend for teaching ESL with content? Okay, STEM disciplines, different talk. I was talking about international course books. ESL stuff, and this is where you would maybe see more local state-produced stuff. Certainly in Canada, there are state-produced textbooks that do this stuff. I don't know, because I'm based in Spain, and I've always been working with the EFL. But even ESL still uses lots of EFL books. So ESL contexts still use things like Headway, still use Cutting Edge or English File, even though there may be more appropriate local ESL type things. Scrolling down desperately here. Susan asks, would course books include
one or two more questions? A few people have to leave, and we're just about quarter past.
Okay, I want to try to get people who haven't asked then.
Right.
Okay,
exactly.
Grammarman. Do you still think comics will have a course in the course books, or do you still think comics will have a place in the course books of the future? Grammarman, I really hope they do. I really hope they do, because for the past 5 years they've been out. It's been preference for photos. I don't know why. I think it's sad. I think good comics and good illustrations do have a place. That's a personal thing, but they've been replaced by stock photography. Why? Because it's cheaper to get a stock photograph of someone shaking hands than to have a really cool cartoon. Also, bad cartoons annoy teachers. That's the truth as well. How many teachers do you hear saying, I hate these horrible drawings? You know, whereas people don't like the photos, but they complain less about it. Two more questions. Penny, is literature hot or not in course books? For example, extracts from literature and short stories. I tried to put this in a course book of mine. It had mixed results. I think it's still hot. With a lot of teachers, it's still hot. It's not hot because it's getting more and more difficult as things go digital. That is a question of rights. So lots of authors do not want to give rights, to give permission for their stuff to be used digitally. I had this example. I tried to get a section from Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient into a book, and we were so close to having it there. It was beautiful, the perfect thing, a wonderful lesson, and then he said no, because in the letter we said it would be used on an interactive whiteboard, and his agent didn't understand what that meant, I think, because they said, you are not allowed to interact with this text. The text must be kept the same way. And I tried to say, we're not going to interact with it. They're just going to read it. And as Diana Freeman is saying, copyright issues for literature and course books, yeah, it's huge. You have to negotiate so many rights that it becomes a question of, is it worth it? Okay. Phil Abbott, do the metropolitan publishers hold so much sway that publishers on the periphery can't get a look in? Internationally, Phil, yes. Publishers on the periphery, what they do, and they do get a look in, and they do tend to work in, is their own local area. So like German publishers or French publishers are two very good examples of this, but you'll see this in other countries. They'll work with the local secondary school markets, and they're the ones who respond quickest to curriculum changes done by the ministry to education reform stuff. And so instead of trying to do stuff and competing with like the internationals at private institutions and private schools and private universities, they'll go to the state schools, the state things, and so on. And I think, Bill, you would find also that state publishers, where they do exist, would find the room to do stuff more in the state school sector. So the publishers, the international publishers, the for-profit ones, are going to be going for the private schools. And I think we're coming to the end of it.
I think we're going to have to stop because we are really running quite late.
Okay. Everybody.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. I think we've set a record for the number of questions. I really don't remember as many at the end, except possibly with David Crystal. So you're in great company.
Fantastic.
I think everyone really enjoyed this. It was a great webinar.
Okay.
And I would just like to announce the next ones. The next IATEFL webinar, going from the bottom, will be with Barbara Hoskin-Sakamoto on the lives of English teachers. This is a project they've been working on.
Excellent.
And this will be on Saturday, the 19th of July, again at 3 p.m. UK time, British Standard Time, 2 p.m. GMT. Is it GMT +1? I'm not sure, but same time as this one was. And an upcoming SIG webinar, an IATEFL BSIG webinar, will take place on Sunday, the 13th of July with Akos Gerov on stop-and-go simulations in intercultural training. This is also 3 p.m. UK time, 4 p.m. Central Europe time. Please check the IATEFL website for more information, login details for these upcoming events. And I would like to thank everyone for taking part today. It's wonderful to have so many logged in. We were well over 100, about 115 at some point on a Saturday in June. That's fantastic. Looking forward to seeing you all in July. Thanks, everyone. Bye.